Another thing, when I go over this process later on, you're going to see how it makes it impossible for shills to actually really gain much power. The only thing I think a shill could do to hurt us with this process is to try to make us think that this process doesn't work. And I'm not saying this so that people won't challenge it. You should challenge it. Challenge the process. Make sure it works. I will not be accusing anybody who challenges it as being a shill. Absolutely not. We need to challenge it and make sure that it actually works. But at some point, we're going to take a vote and we're going to say, look, how many people actually do think this could work? The rest of you, please leave. And we're going to try and make it work. And once the process begins, if there are shills who stay, first of all, it's impossible. First of all, it's close to impossible to getting in there in the first place. Second of all, going through the first round is going to be incredibly difficult as a shill. You have to have a supermajority of people trusting you, and you have to be trusted more than the other people in your group. Then you have to go to another round. Winning that first round doesn't even give you much power or influence. You have a small amount of power if you get through to the next round. And so you're not going to be a majority in the next round. You're going to be one person as a shill. It is statistically impossible, I would say, to be elected as a shill. I think the only way that could happen is if there is more shills in the group than there are legitimate people. And if that is to happen, one element that I will not be proposing to use initially is an invite-only group. So if you try this process and you feel that it's failing because of the people involved, you can implement an invite-only process to add on to the rest. And that should eliminate the issue you're having if it were possible. We have to find out. We have to actually try this process to really find out. So let's talk about setting our goals. If you're completely focused on your goal, you can't be distracted, because once the goal is clear in your mind, it's much easier to determine when something aligns and when it doesn't. A distraction might be alluring. It might stimulate your curiosity or your ego or give you a false sense of security. But when you return to the strategy you've established in your mind or on paper, if this doesn't fit in there, you can choose to stop wasting your time or raise alarm bells. Whatever he's doing right now, look, I love you, brother. I know you're a good guy, but I think what you're doing is wrong, or it's a waste of our time. The best way that a shill can successfully decoy the people is by creating paranoia and suspicion among the people. Do not be distracted by people exposing what they perceive to be a shill. Remember that this comes from a place of emotion. When emotions run high, logic runs low. Their intentions may not be bad. In fact, they probably have something more important they want to draw your attention to, but they're too distracted, they're too emotional. It's probably something to do with something that they're doing, and that's what they need to be showing you. What matters more, if they're right or if they're wrong? If they're right, then once that person does something that doesn't align with your goals, those of us who know exactly what our goals are naturally going to gravitate away. We're not going to support that activity. So we don't need to be told that they're a shill. We're just going to see what they're doing and say that this is not something that's helping us to achieve our goal, because we know what our goal is. And what if they're wrong? We need leaders. But who wants to be leading a community of people who repeatedly accuse people who took the initiative to lead? We now have a situation where I believe nobody wants to lead anymore. We have seen the people who have done the most for our movement burned at the stake. Who wants to be next? People start to choose sides when we're really all on the same side. It creates more paranoia and suspicion among the people, which will create more divides. This is how quickly a shill can destroy us when we aren't focused on a clearly defined goal. They don't have to be involved at all for that to happen. So what is our goal? Freedom means something different to different people. First, there are the clueless people who believe that they are free because the choice that they happen to be making was the one that they believe doesn't cost them their freedom. But of course, if any choice at all costs you freedom, then you were never free at all to choose. They were coerced and they just didn't mind. Then there are those of us who made a choice that's perceived to cost our freedom, either by taking the injection knowing we didn't want it, or by not taking the injection, but allowing the fear of what this means for us to imprison us. Freedom is a state of mind. There are no chains on us. There was nothing the lockdowns prevented us from doing other than the things that involved people who imprisoned themselves. Another person's enslavement does not determine yours or mine. I could be arrested for executing a constitutional right, but even behind those bars where I know I'm part of making history, I'm free. The day they break my spirit, and they may try, that's the day I'm not free. And I can rebuild my spirit and be free again. So freedom is not the only thing we're seeking. With the right frame of mind, with courage, spirit, and drive, we're already free. Telling yourself you're not will hold you back as your excuse. Our lives have just not been what they were because of the world crippling around us. So in regards to our goals, we need to be much more specific than just freedom alone. Especially because we don't even want things to just go back to normal, knowing now that what we thought was normal was deranged. Like, everyone around us was far more deranged than we ever knew. So there is no going back to normal. We've woke up from what we thought was a rational world. Well, maybe some of us, to realize that we were sleeping all along. Many of us were sheep before all this happened. So if we're not free, it's because we're held captive by our own fear or self-doubt. Now, I'm not going to tell you what your goals should be, but I will tell you, if you haven't overcome your fear, that should be your first goal. One of the things you can do to do that is stay focused on what's within your control. Setting your other goals will help you to overcome some of your fears, and understanding what steps are required to actually achieve those goals. Let's say your goal was to re-establish Irish sovereignty by overthrowing the government. First of all, you have to establish exactly what that means, all the problems it'll create, and how we would be prepared for those. Then consider what position we'd have to be in order to do whatever overthrowing the government really means. For instance, in order for the erectus of the Irish Free State to be established and recognised outside of Ireland, besides our 5-year civil war and War of Independence, the entire country of institutions, including the legal system, had to be rebuilt and redirected to stop supporting the Crown. That was enormous. The education system, as we know, was hijacked by the Catholic Church. Being underprepared gave them the perfect opportunity to overpower us, our culture, and our children. Without establishing new institutions to replace the old, we leave ourselves extremely vulnerable to much worse dependencies. So I would argue a much more reasonable goal than overthrowing the government would be to establish ourselves as independent of the government. In order to first clarify what that means, and second, to ensure that it's realistic and achievable, let's put that into more detail. To establish ourselves as independent would mean rebuilding the institutions we as a country depend on, so that these new institutions are not connected to or funded by our government. If you're wondering how such a thing could be funded without it coming from our own pockets, have a little faith. That's where this blog is going. I will be explaining that, or I have explained that in another video of my experience of that already. Now, when you look at the big picture, there's quite a large number of institutions that we rely on. Healthcare, welfare, banking, education, road maintenance, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. All this obviously sounds very overwhelming. As a goal for an individual, it's very unrealistic. However, as a collective goal, it's not only possible, but there is an innovative technology that exists to enable us to build systems that are more equitable, self-sufficient, and sovereign. So sovereign that no one person, group, or institution can hold centralized authority over it. You might already know where I'm going with this from what I just said, but now we're going to talk about a little imaginary friend we have called money.